Hi, this is Kirby. It is April 19th, 2025, and this is basically Hollywood Part 3. Now, Hollywood Parts 1 and 2 are on Sean Atwood's channel, and I will leave links below so that you can listen to those if you have missed them. This is something that I wrote, I think, about a year ago, and it includes the following people: John Landis, Steven Spielberg, Michael Jackson, Roy Cohn, Andy Warhol, Naomi Campbell, and Heather O'Rourke, although there are more people that are involved in this particular podcast that I am doing for you today. Now, I titled it at the time, Hollywood's Packed with the DEVIL, and the let's say the people that are not of age to our SACRIFICED. Now, I apologize that I have to spell some words, but sadly, that is where we are at. And so as I said, this is an article I wrote about a year ago before I did the other two sit downs with Sean on his channel, but it's all Hollywood related. And so I'm calling it part 3, although at the time, I called it Hollywood's Packed with the so-called who. And then I start that with the words, the following is a paragraph from my memoir, The Billionaire's Woman, about my years as a blank slave to one of the members of this elite, let's say SATANIC club that we have been studying. And then I quote from my book. He tells me his best friends are Hollywood producer John Landis of the film Animal House with John Belushi fame, and fashion mogul Kenny Zimmerman of Kennar, whose models include Naomi Campbell, Linda Evangelista, and all the supermodels that also walk the runway for Victoria's Secret. All those many years ago, I didn't understand the connection between a billionaire who was a regular guest at the White House, Hollywood, and the fashion industry. I get it now. While I shared much with you to date, frankly, there's a lot more. And seriously, it just gets creepier. So for those of you who are new to my work and my connection to these evil and twisted people, what I did was I included a couple of pictures. One of them is of Roy Cohn dressed in a white tuxedo, dated September 16th, 1983, attending Bob Guccione. Now, Bob Guccione was the editor and the publisher of Penthouse magazine, uh, attending a party that Bob Guccione threw for my abuser's father's wife, who was at the time Piazzadora. And as we all know, Cohn was a blackmailer, a child transporter, and became the attorney to Donald Trump, who was also, he was in that circle. And I remember that time very well. And then I show a photo of Bob Guccione with Piazzadora, Andy Warhol, who many of you have heard me discuss as it pertains to J.E. and Michelle Rickless. And then I include a photo of Naomi Campbell, who was connected to everything, modeling for my abuser's best friend, Kenny, for one of his Kennar ads. And then, I include a couple of pictures of Naomi with a young Virginia. And then, I begin. John Landis, you may recall, had a horrific accident during the filming of Twilight Zone, the movie, in 1982. And then I go on to ask the question, but was it? Actor Vic Morrow, whose birth name is Morozov, along with two children, 7-year-old Mika Din Lee and 6-year-old Renee Xing Yi Chen, were tragically killed while shooting a night scene under a hovering helicopter. Morrow was reaching out to grab Lee when the helicopter fell on top of him and the two children. Morrow and Lee were decapitated by the helicopter's main rotor blades, while Chen was crushed to death by the helicopter's right landing skid. All three were unalived almost instantly. So there is a connection, frankly, to JF in the Twilight Zone. And I'm curious if any of you are aware of it. And if you are, please add it to the comment section so that I know that you have been sort of locked in step with everything I have shared with you. And so as a reminder, in 1983, Landis made Michael Jackson's Thriller music video after he created the shape-shifting creatures for An American Werewolf in London, which was filmed in 1981. And so 1 year later, in 1984, Michael Jackson was filming a Pepsi commercial when his hair caught fire. I think there's anyone who was alive at the time remembers this, and those of you who came along later probably know about this. The hairspray he used was Aquanet, which is owned by Fabergé, which is one of the many companies owned by the Rickless family. And the Rickless family, as you may know, are the family I write about in my memoir, The Billionaire's Woman. So Michael Jackson's connections to JE were revealed in a 2016 deposition given by Johanna Schoberg. And curiously, another victim, I'm going to keep her name out of it for now, was married to a man by the name of Vincent Amen, who is a former Jackson employee and who was also named as one of the 5 alleged unindicted co-conspirators in the late star's unsuccessful 2005 molestation trial. And then I include some disturbing images of paintings made by his wife, who again worked for JE. In 2023, author Stephen Chane published his book Fly By Night, The Secret Story of Steven Spielberg, Warner Brothers, and the Twilight Zone Unalivements. It covers the fact that Landis invited himself to give a eulogy at Morrow's funeral. This sounds about right, frankly, because based on my own experience with his best friend, these men have no shame. The book also describes the rise of location manager, Dick Vane, into becoming an executive producer after perjuring himself on the stand. Because there was there was a trial. There was another, what I call, sorry, I just call them sham trials. There was another trial, and he did perjure himself, but he wasn't called out on it or anything. He, in fact, got a promotion. And then in the book also covers that Spielberg has, the red liquid on his hands. And we know that Spielberg has ties to J.E., Wexner, and Seagram chairman Edgar Bronfman Sr. Now, I included then an image of Heather O'Rourke, who starred in Poltergeist. And so those of you who deep dive into Spielberg would know that he's very dark, and he's alleged to have been involved in the unalivement of Heather O'Rourke, who's the little girl who starred in his horror film in 1982. And so again, some excerpts from Chane's book. The revulsion shared by the helicopter camera operators Roger Smith and Randy Robinson became widespread among the mourners after John Landis pushed himself forward to speak. No one outside of George Folsey and the Morrow children and their mother knew that as a speaker, the eulogist was self-invited. In his piercing falsetto, Landis repeated the speech he had read to his producer partner, George Folsey, over the phone the day before. He stated how happy Morrow had been as an actor. But when he came to mention when he came to mention how just before the last take, Vic took him aside to thank him for the opportunity, there were ripples of protest. And what he's talking about is at the service where the family and the friends of Vic Morrow were there. And basically what Landis is doing is congratulating himself for having given Vic Morrow a chance in a film where there was complete disregard for the safety of the characters. Now, this happens again and again and again and again. I spoke with you, it's on my playlist here, about the so-called accident that Alec Baldwin had and how even before the trial started, he was absolved of all responsibility. And there's just complete disregard for the people who are filming, who are in these films by these producers who become part of the untouchable elite. Because Hollywood, as I tell you over and over again, is a very important arm. It's as important an arm as the media is, okay? So Landis went on. He wasn't embarrassed by the crowd kind of being shocked at what he just said. And he went out and said that the film was immortal, meaning his film, which he was still going to produce despite the fact that 3 people were unalived, and that Vic Morrow was going to live forever. Like, this guy really, it's because they don't care, and they only see the world through their own eyes, and they see it as a reflection of themselves. So it's like you just look at yourself in the mirror, and that's the only person that matters to you. So the people that were attending the memorial had to tell him, enough already, enough, just stop. I mean, it was just horrifying to everybody that was there except for John Landis. So Landis is like, I'm gonna just go back a second. Warner Brothers executive Lucy Fisher first suggesting using the kids after they determined that Landis's initial treatment needed like rewrites. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that he had kind of greenlit, which were later, oh no, you can't do this. And he had submitted 3 drafts. And then eventually his revisions were approved by the studio. And the studio in this case is Warner Brothers. And however, she specifically, meaning Lucy Fisher, the executive producer at Warner, she had another reservation. She was really curious and she wanted to know from Frank Marshall and John Landis whether using the children at night would be a problem. Meaning, is there going to be is this safe? And according to a memo generated by Warner's own internal investigation of the crash, both men told her not to worry about it. From the very start, the differences between Warner Brothers, specifically between production chief Fred Gallo and the Landis Group on almost every important issue required all of Frank Marshall's arbitration skills because Landis insisted on independence in producing his segment. Marshall intervened and arranged it so that Landis would have complete authority with the understanding that he would conform to the rules. Now, frankly, that's not what happened, right? Landis just went right ahead, not conforming to the rules. And now this is an excerpt from chapter 31, titled Dr. Fantasy. During the catastrophic final shot, Frank Marshall was so frightened. He dove under a truck and witnessed the fireballs, the helicopter, the disaster and panic. Spielberg's man seemed to be the only cool head in the chaos that followed. Marshall was one of the first to enter the river, and though this act was kept a secret throughout the entire 5 years of the TZ case, he carried the lifeless 6-year-old body of Renee Xing-Yi Shen to shore and laid it at the feet of Virginia Kearns, the movie's hairdresser, who held a flashlight while vain attempts were being made to revive the unalived girl. Then Marshall ran back to assist John Landis, who was observed by Kearns, just running around saying, "Oh, S. Oh, Jesus." When Marshall reached Landis, according to other witnesses, the director was in a state of shock, flailing and screaming and beating his hands on the blood-stained water. Marshall helped Landis to shore and put him next to the small Asian man with a dazed look, who was the father of 7-year-old Mika Din Lee, who, by the way, she also perished. Okay. So, I mean, it goes on discussing what happened in that day with Spielberg and John Landis and how they behaved before, during, and after. And of course, as I said, there was a trial. Um, uh, and it really, the Spielberg thing lasted, it was a 5-year legal proceeding. And however, we know that John Landis has. Well, before I tell you this, I'm going to say that on May 29th, 1989, Landis and 4 members of his crew were found, quote, not guilty in the unalivements of Vic Morrow and the 2 children. Not guilty. I mean, heck, you know what? They spent 5 years. They knew they were going to find them not guilty. So I just want to bring your attention to the fact that there is a man by the name of Max Landis, who was born August 3rd, 1985. He is the son of John Landis, and he has been accused of S, A, and R. So anyway, for those of you who are on my Substack, I am going to be dropping an article tomorrow on Gene Hackman and his obsession with MK Ultra themed movies. So that's dropping tomorrow. And for those of you who are on my Patreon, I uploaded something about the transportation situation that we have had in this country and others. And I concluded with a never before connection between Leslie Wexner and the 3-letter agency that apparently everybody has missed. However, that's up on Patreon for those of you who are members of that there. And for those of you here, thank you for giving this a like. I'm anxiously awaiting your comments on this newest podcast, and I hope you guys have a good day. Okay, until the next time. Bye.